Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us. My name is Cass, and I'm an analyst at Allianz, as well as an Early in Careers Committee member, and I'll be your host for the second Thriving from the Start Network event for 2025. You'll also see Patrick supporting behind the scenes today. Pat is also an Early in Careers Committee member and will be assisting with the audience interactions throughout the session. So a big thank you to Pat for that. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. To give you some context, Thriving from the Start is an initiative the Early in Careers Committee created and forms a part of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance Australia, which is a business-led and non-profit organisation focused on creating mentally healthy workplaces. The network was developed specifically to support early career professionals by creating a space to connect, learn, and grow together. Our goal is to build a supportive, engaging community of like-minded peers who care about mental well-being and want to shape better, healthier workplaces and habits from the start of their journeys. Now, we're all very excited to have you here today to discuss a topic that's close to the committee's heart, burnout. It's a challenge that's becoming increasingly common, especially for young professionals. CMHAA's recent report, Leading Mentally Healthy Workplaces, surveyed nearly 10,000 people and found that 46% of respondents are experiencing some level of burnout. Even more striking, early in career individuals reported the highest rates at 54%. Today, we're going to dig into what burnout really is, why it happens, and most importantly, how to manage it so you can burn bright, not out. And we're lucky to have two fantastic speakers to guide us through this, combining their expert insights and real-life experience. Joining us today is Dr. John Chan, an honorary industry fellow at UTS and managing director of Infinite Potential.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today to discuss this topic I'm very passionate about. So a little bit about my background. So my background is as an organizational psychologist, and for the past 5 years, I've been leading a piece of global research to better understand the global trends, the causes, and the impacts that burnout has on individuals and organizations as well. Our goal is to kind of provide insights to kind of help leaders better understand what actually is causing this and the effects that it has on the organizations to sort of help them kind of prioritize this as something that they really need to do to create not just healthier, but more productive kind of work environments as well. And this might be a little bit radical, but my mission really is to kind of help support the evolution of what the next workplace is going to look like. And what we're really trying to do is kind of create this sustainable workplace that really balances the needs of the organization with the needs of its people. We want to move away from this model of the organization taking from the individuals and having something that is sort of mutually beneficial. And I think among all of the uncertainties going on around the world, I really do believe that we can create a workplace that is sort of the source of stability and an engine for positive mental health.
Thank you, John. We're also joined by my colleague and former Early in Careers Committee member, Rebecca Hoffman.
Thanks, Cass. Hi, everyone. My name's Beck. I am the transformation lead at Allianz in our transformation program. So I work in a really fast-paced and agile environment. I'm here today just to give a bit of a personal experience and reflection. In saying that, I haven't experienced clinical burnout myself. So I'll share what I can about some of the topics that we go through, and you can kind of take what you find helpful. And if there's things that you go, oh, I haven't experienced that or I can't relate to that yet, please feel free to just let those things slide through as well.
Thanks, Beck. And just a quick note for everyone that the chat function is available, so please feel free to share your thoughts or pop in any questions as we go, and we'll come back to them in the Q&A. Now, before we get into discussions, we'd love to get a quick sense of how you all personally perceive burnout. If you've got your phone handy, just scan the QR code that's now on the screen and it'll take you to 3 quick questions. The first question is, what one word comes to mind when you think about burnout? Feel free to enter some words, whatever pops into your head first. It could be things such as exhaustion, foggy, stress, or pressure. There are no right or wrong answers here. We'll be using some of your responses to help guide and reflect our discussions today, so thank you in advance for contributing. Now, as we wait for the responses to come in, I'll share one from me. When I think about burnout, the word that comes to mind is disconnected. Personally, burnout doesn't always show up as a total collapse and is often more subtle for me. It creeps in quietly and lingers for a while before I even notice it, and I find myself going through the motions for an extended period until I start to feel everything feels a bit flat. And whilst I'm going through it, I'm still getting things done and showing up, but lacking the energy, motivation, or headspace to truly engage with things that matter. As everyone else's words start to come through on the screen, it'll be interesting to see whether any of you connect with that feeling too, or whether different words and experiences come to surface. So we're starting to get some interesting responses already, and it seems like a lot of us associate burnout with words such as exhaustion, anxiety, fatigue, unmotivated, stress. So they all kind of follow the same kind of category. So it's clear that burnout means very similar things to everyone, and there are a lot of commonalities. So with that in mind, John, are you able to start explaining what true burnout is and how it can manifest?
Yeah, of course. So as we kind of saw, we're seeing here in the word cloud, all of us have, even though I think there is a lot of similarities, there's also a lot of slight differences in how we define burnout. And most of us, who have gone through and experienced burnout all experience it slightly differently, and sort of the causes are always slightly differently. And I think actually that's one of the biggest things that's holding us back from really addressing this problem, because we don't have that one kind of definition. And the term burnouts become really popularized in recent years, which has been really positive in that it has brought more attention to this topic, and it's starting to kind of destigmatize the topic, so that people are much more open to talk about it. But it also has become a bit of a buzzword that often kind of gets misconstrued. People talk about being burned out on a lot of things. People are burned out from work, people are burned out on social media. I heard someone say the other day they're burned out on Thai food. We're just kind of using that word really colloquially for all kinds of things. But if we really want to focus on solving this problem, we need to sort of be on the same page on what it is. And in 2019, the World Health Organization defined burnout as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So this defined burnout really as an experience specific to work. So think of burnout like champagne. It can only come from one place, right? The reason why this is really important, because it kind of places the focus on where the root cause of the problem is. So a lot of workplace matters, but also where the solution really lies. So it doesn't mean that a person can't experience really high levels of exhaustion doing other things within their lives, or feeling cynical or negative or disengaged in other parts of their lives as well. But that is a little bit different than burnout. And so within burnout, the definition of burnout, one thing I kind of want to point out, it's chronic. So it's not just kind of having a bad day or even a bad week. The people that we've talked to and worked with who have gone through that chronic burnout, a lot of them say it takes months, sometimes years, for this feeling to really kind of develop. And there's these three characteristics here that really defines burnout. The first one's exhaustion. I think everybody knows what that one is. But the other two I want to point out, and I think it's actually quite a lot more vicious, these other two. The second one is cynicism. When you have that kind of mental distance and feeling like you're alienated from the work that you're doing. Oftentimes what we see is people who used to love the work that they do no longer really likes what they do. They don't like the work. They don't like people that they work with. That part of it really is it's a kind of terrible kind of thing. A lot of times what we see is when people are really exhausted with their role, they may sort of leave the organization and go somewhere else. When people start becoming cynical about their role, they actually will leave the sector. And for certain sectors like education and health that we work with, that's quite a problematic piece. The other thing that we see is what we call reduced efficacy or reduced professional efficacy. That's when we start kind of losing that ability to focus. It takes us longer to do things that we know we can do. We make more mistakes. Things are just harder in general in everything that we do. And one thing I really want to kind of point out is that burnout occurs when the individual is experiencing all three of those dimensions simultaneously. So if you're just exhausted, but you're loving what you do, you're kicking goals, you're doing it really well, you're just exhausted. And similarly, you could just really hate your job, but you're doing a pretty good job there. You're not that exhausted. That is something else. It's the combination of these three that makes it really difficult to kind of get out, because it creates like the spiral of you're exhausted, you don't like what you're doing, so you don't have the motivation, then you make more mistakes, then you have to do even more work to kind of correct those mistakes, and so on. And that really kind of makes it quite vicious and difficult for that to come back. Now, one thing I just want to really quickly point out, I often kind of get asked, so what's the difference between, like, how do I know if I'm just a bit stressed versus if I'm burnt out? And I think the way I always talk about it is the difference between having too much versus not enough. When you're stressed, you have way too much stimulation. You're overly engaged in what you're doing. You have this kind of sense of urgency and kind of hyperactivity. And it's also very time specific. So think about a project that you need. Let's say you need to present a project to a group of senior leaders. That is, a lot of times that's quite stressful. You've got all kinds of reactions. You got a sense of urgency, but it's very time specific. After that event is over, you kind of go back to kind of your normal state. Burnout's a little bit different. That is when you don't have enough motivation, you don't have enough energy to actually do whatever that is. You feel really disengaged in doing that. You've got that sort of really dull and kind of blunted kind of emotion. You just don't have enough to actually get yourself to do something. And another sort of really big difference is that it's timeless. Once people start experiencing burnout, it's not a specific event. It is just a general feeling, and it takes work to kind of get them out of that experience.
Thanks for that, John. Bringing you in now, Beck, and listening to how John defined burnout. Does this resonate with your personal experiences, and are you able to share what it looked or felt like with you throughout your career?
Yeah, definitely. So I think exactly as John said, it's the feeling of exhaustion which resonates most with me. My job is part of a global project, so I work quite extended hours sometimes so that I can collaborate with colleagues on the other side of the world. And I'm quite lucky. Allianz is really good. We have different flexible working options. So I exercise one of those in that I work a 9-day fortnight to try and manage some of that time that I lose during the week. I get it back on my time in lieu day. I think being on a project of this size, which I've now been doing for about 18 months, it's definitely peaks and troughs. And in those peak points where you're doing very complex work at quite a high intensity, sometimes for quite prolonged periods, that's when I really notice those feelings of exhaustion. Earlier this year, I didn't feel the cynicism. I wasn't feeling reduced efficacy, but all of a sudden I got sick and I just couldn't get better because my body was so tired. It was telling me I needed to stop and I needed to rest. And I did that. I took the time. I got a little bit better. And then about a month later, some of that stress was still lingering there and I got shingles. So even though mentally I felt fine, emotionally I was feeling okay, just kind of regular levels of stress, and was coping with that quite well, my body was indicating to me, hey, something different's going on here that you need to pay attention to. in terms of, feeling cynical, I think sometimes it is normal to have that feeling, but generally I've had it in isolation. It's been about a very specific thing. And if you spend the time reflecting on, why am I feeling this way, usually you can work through it. And I find often having that conversation and flagging with the manager, like, this isn't working for me. I'm not feeling very connected to my job. I don't understand what I'm meant to be doing, or I feel like I'm not doing a good job. Then that opens up conversations that can help work through different strategies and ways of managing that. But I think for me personally, cynicism and reduced efficacy is something that I've usually only experienced very briefly and in quite isolated circumstances. So never those three interacting simultaneously together as per the definition.
Thanks for that, Beck. Now, when we talk about burnout, what are some of those deeper root causes you're seeing across workplaces today beyond just the heavy workload, John?
So what we're seeing in terms of some of the deeper causes, there's been a lot of research into kind of this space. I think the research on burnout started probably in the 50s, and so there's 6 really consistent things that keeps coming up as some of the root causes for burnout. The first one is, of course, workload. While job demand sort of is that major issue, there's also this mindset that we're seeing, this mindset that we need to be constantly productive. We constantly need to be doing something, or we kind of feel bad about that. For those of you here, how many of you feel kind of guilty taking some time off, or even when you're sick, like feeling a little bit guilty that you're not actively kind of working? That all sort of falls into that sort of a workload kind of sign. The second one is lack of control or autonomy over the work that you do. You might see this in a lot of those roles where you're having to a lot of times react to things rather than being able to steadily work on a piece of work. Those work environments where you are just reacting to all of the craziness that's going on, or from different stakeholders as well. Third piece, lack of recognition or reward. That's pretty self-explanatory. The fourth one is lack of organizational support. So, for example, when someone leaves a team and the role doesn't get backfilled, and the rest of the team now have to pick up that work, those type of organizational support that the organizations do, or perhaps those kind of policies, organizations not having the policies so that their people can have a kind of balanced life. All of those things kind of fits into that category. The 4th point is sort of the unfair and inequitable treatment. So this is often experienced by those, especially in minority populations. There can be kind of direct examples as having women take notes or doing non-core jobs all around or within the organization. But there's also indirect things, such as like not creating environments where to facilitate for those with, let's say, neurodivergent needs or other type of needs as well. So that unfair and inequitable treatment, either is conscious or unconscious, that happens quite a lot. And the last one, it's a sort of values misalignment. What we see a lot is when people don't have an alignment with the work that they're doing. They're just kind of going because I need to pay rent, so I need to have a job. But having that really big values misalignment, a lot of times that also really feeds into that into burnout. Now, one thing I kind of wanted to just really quickly kind of talk about what's on the screen at the moment, just to kind of help talk about what really kind of contributes to the burnout, rather than kind of talking about individual kind of things. There's sort of 3 levels where burnout can happen, and this is sort of the tricky thing. It's not just one thing that happens, and the kind of root causes can come from several things. The first level there is kind of those organizational structures. Some organizations have certain policies or practices, or even the way they design their jobs, that will just burn out people. And that is how it has been designed. Certain sectors, the way that they work, it is just a way of burning out people. The second level there is those interpersonal dynamics. Within the workplace, those relationships and culture, or even those power dynamics between managers and their reports. When you have a manager that micromanages, that expects you to be on 24/7, or even those cultures where you have a really competitive environment with your team members. The way that the culture is set up, where they try to get you to compete because there's only one space for promotion, or whatever it is. Those type of environment can also be a source of the burnout. And finally, those kind of individual mindsets. I think those mental models that we all kind of have with us, sometimes those may also contribute to burnout as well.
Thank you, John. Now, moving on into the second question in the form and following on from that, we wanted to ask you, as an early in career, what do you see as the top contributor to burnout? So if you haven't already answered this question, feel free to scan the QR code to join in, and we'll take a moment to look at your responses. So what we're seeing is there is a big commonality of work pressures and the workload. Now, just to discuss on this, and a question for both you, Beck, and John, do you agree with these responses, and why do you think for early in careers in particular, they're more at risk of burnout? We'll start with you, John.
Sure. Yeah, this is really great and really good reflections on what I'm seeing here is that those work pressures, taking on too much work. I think this is something that happens quite a lot, especially when you're early in your career. You still want to prove your value, right? You want to prove what you're doing. You're on that career track that you want to be promoted. You want to kind of move on within your career. So, and also, you're new at what you're doing. So whenever there's kind of new opportunities, a lot of you would be really interested, actually just curious about the actual work and the experience. So you just say yes, and you kind of overcommit a lot of times. I know I did this early in my career. I said yes to everything, and that was, later upon reflection, that was not a good idea. But I think what's on here, yeah, that's exactly right. And I think there's one thing here that I think it's not on here, but I think you might have alluded to, which is sort of the difficulty in setting boundaries, especially when you're kind of early in your career. Having that, being sort of a kind of junior person within the organization, working with a more senior manager, it's often really difficult to set boundaries. Now, it's difficult to set boundaries for everybody throughout the levels, but I think it's especially difficult for those early in their career. And when that big power imbalance is there, I think a lot of times we feel like we can't say no, or even sometimes we've got that mental model of if I set boundaries and saying no to certain things, I feel a little bit like I'm letting the team down, or maybe I don't want to be perceived as being difficult and saying no about that. And so a lot of times people get that in their heads, and they don't say no as much as they as they should, and that kind of contributes to burnout.
Thank you, Beck. Why do you think early in careers, individuals in particular are more at risk?
Yeah, I agree with exactly what John said around when you first start out, you want to be a bit like a sponge and soak everything up. And that means you want to be involved in as much as possible. And you do want to show your value and that, you're competent and you can do things. I think something that it sticks out in my mind because I started in 2020 and I did maybe a month and a half in the office. And there was a really clear separation of when I arrive at work, I'm at work and I do my job, and then 5 o'clock, 5:30 hits, and I go home. Or if I'm still there, my manager probably walks past my desk and asks me why. And now with hybrid work, I think it's slightly different. I think the term work-life balance is a really kind of detrimental term in a way, because we don't have balance. What we have now is blend, where we work from home, and sometimes that extends longer than it would if we were commuting to physically attend an office. And so I think there's also an element in that hybrid working model where some of those boundaries are harder to set because of where you're actually set up and the way that we work. But then there's also an element of not being able to observe work routines. And what I mean by that is actually watching your senior manager or your manager role model those behaviors of starting at a set time, finishing at a set time, taking a lunch break, setting their team status to do not disturb, and being really firm on deep work time is deep work time, and those kind of time management and productivity skills that you might be more aware of if you can physically observe someone doing it, as opposed to online where you're just kind of running your own show to a degree. I think that plays a big part.
Thanks, Beck. I completely agree with that. So now going into our latest insights, John, your team recently published the State of Burnout report and introduced this new idea of the distracted worker. This really stood out to me as an early in career. I feel like I'm constantly switching between tasks, platforms, and my priorities. Are you able to unpack this idea a bit more for us and what implications it has for mental well-being?
Yeah. So as sort of the pace and complexity of work, it's constantly kind of getting faster and faster. And it seems like every week there's a new AI tool or a new technology that we're having to use. So that, or there's always another reorganization that we need to know know who everybody is, where everybody are. And then there's all of the things going on in our lives, and all the things that's kind of going on in the world. All of these things happening at the moment is really creating a really high level of distraction in all of us. And the ability for a lot of us to be able to kind of stay focused and attentive is kind of getting harder and harder. Even lots of reports about all of the uses of social media and kind of other tech tools really has shortened our kind of attention kind of level. And so our research, this year's research, we looked at what we're witnessing as what we're calling the distracted worker. So those are individuals whose focus is fractured by the very just the demands of modern work. The modern worker is constantly being pulled in all kinds of directions, rather than kind of being able to kind of engage deeply within the tasks that they need to do. There's so much stuff going on. There's all of these beeps and pings and all of these pop-ups coming up during work that we all kind of do and answer to, and not to mention the kind of long to-do list and endless meetings. All of this stuff we kind of have in our head, and it's as other research have shown that when a person is kind of focused and kind of working and they get distracted by something, on average, it takes about 23 minutes to get back to that point of really focused work. And just kind of think about your typical work day. How often are you interrupted by, oh, here's a new email, or somebody's pinging me on Teams or Slack, or somebody just coming by and saying hi, those kind of things. And every time that happens, the amount of times it takes you to kind of get back into that rhythm, I think that's a real big problem, both for individuals and for organizations as well. And so I think this is something that I think most people, but especially early career professionals, should really think about. How do we reduce our level of distraction? Because it's only going to get worse, and it's also making us all less productive. And also, as we've seen in our research, is reducing our overall levels of well-being. Another kind of way to think about it is, having too many windows open on your browser. All of these things kind of add to your cognitive load, and you'll just kind of get to a point where you start maxing out and everything just starts slowing down. And as you can see on the screen there, a few of the things that we found, those who are highly distracted are a lot more likely to also be experiencing burnout. They report being much less productive than those who are not as destructive. And this is an interesting point I think we'll talk a little bit more about, which is they also are much more likely to experience loneliness in the workplace.
Thank you. Yeah. And going on to that loneliness, you in the report it also mentioned that people who do experience it are also 2.5 times more likely to experience loneliness, which I'm talking about burnout, sorry. Can you talk about why loneliness is so closely linked to burnout, especially for early in career professionals?
Yeah, loneliness is a topic that I'm personally very kind of passionate about, and also, find very troubling. We're living in the most connected period of kind of humanity, but right now we are seeing this growing loneliness epidemic all around society. It used to be, I think we were seeing a lot more of it, probably in sort of retirees, kind of elder population, but it has really jumped in all of the other age groups, especially in the younger population as well. And actually, before I kind of go on, I just kind of want to quickly point out that that there's a difference between loneliness and social isolation. So social isolation is an objective measure, like how many times did you talk to somebody today? So it's a very objective kind of measure. But loneliness is a bit more subjective. It's a subjective and kind of distressing experience for somebody, and it comes from a discrepancy in an individual's desire and their actual experience. So for someone, someone can have like 2 really good conversations a day, and they're good. Like that is good for me today. Other people might have 5, and they still feel a little bit lonely. So a lot of that is very some of that is individualistic in there, and we wanted to kind of see what the link between burnout and the loneliness kind of rates are, because when you track it, probably we looked at it for around 10 years span, the trajectory was very similar in terms of levels of burnout around the world and loneliness. And so what we found was that burnout, those who are experiencing burnout are, as you mentioned, 2.5 times more likely to experience loneliness. But interestingly, it doesn't work the other around. So if you're experiencing loneliness, it doesn't sort of increase your likelihood of experiencing burnout. Sort of going back to our initial definition, it is a very kind of work-specific thing. Another thing that we found, which is kind of troubling, is that 39% of Australians are experiencing workplace loneliness versus 22% globally. So something's happening within sort of the Australian workforce. We have a much higher level of experiencing that workplace loneliness. And those who are experiencing workplace loneliness, they have much lower well-being scores. They indicate much lower levels of engagement and a sense of belonging as well.
Thank you for that, John. So moving on from that, burnout can also sometimes creep up slowly. So what are some of those early warning signs or symptoms that we should be keeping an eye out for? We'll start with John and then move on to Beck, please.
Sure. There's a lot of kind of physical, emotional kind of symptoms that you'll kind of start seeing. I think that probably the most obvious one that we see in most people is probably sleep in terms of the physical symptoms, and a lot of kind of gastro type of issues. Those are 2 of the probably most commonly early signs of that. But kind of a little bit looking on the screen here, there's a few sort of, I guess, bigger kind of picture things that are probably a little bit easier to tell within yourself, which is the first one, withdrawing from responsibilities and interactions. When you just say no to everything, even things that you used to like going to, you just feel like, oh, everything is such a drag because you don't have the motivation to do it. You're just kind of withdrawing from that, isolating yourself from others, taking longer to get things done, maybe using food, drug, or alcohol to cope, taking out your frustrations on others. we see that those who are experiencing burnout, they have a very short fuse when they didn't used to. Like they used, this is quite a common sign in people experiencing burnout, that sort of taking out in the frustration, mainly because of that sort of cynicism piece where they hate their work now. They don't like the people that they're working with anymore. And it's not even on a personal it's not on a personal level. It is more of just being frustrated and kind of disengaged with that whole field, skipping work or coming in late or leaving early. Now, for a lot of people that we worked with that has gone through burnout, they often say that they didn't know that this was happening to them. Since some of this takes quite a long time to kind of develop, they just kind of normalize some of these behaviors. And so what we always kind of talk about is these behaviors, actually, it's a lot easier for someone else to see that in you or see it in somebody else than it is for them to see about themselves. And one thing, as you kind of redo this, kind of think about, are you experiencing any of these, but also about others that you kind of work with as well. Just keep an eye on each other. Like when you see major changes in behavior, and I think that's probably the biggest kind of general thing, when they have a major kind of behavior change or emotional change, physical change, that's a really good time to maybe try and have a conversation and just kind of check that they're okay. It's much easier to see in other people than it is for yourself.
Thanks for that. And Beck, have you ever felt kind of that major change in your behaviors and your symptoms, or have you ever experienced friends or family or colleagues that have felt that, and how did you reach out to them?
The one that sticks out for me that I notice myself doing sometimes is just taking a little bit longer to get things done. Like things that I normally be quite quick with, they're things I've done before, I know how to do them, that I would usually knock over really fast. I find myself procrastinating or just, it'll take me 30 minutes when normally it will take me 5. That kind of thing is the main one that I notice. I think one of the things that we did really well, particularly during COVID, was because we couldn't see one another, we were proactively reaching out all the time and checking in on our colleagues. And we kind of had scheduled check-in points throughout the week that, it's not work-related chat. It's just for us to have that opportunity to build connection. And I think it's so important to continue that now that we're in the hybrid model. So things like when you are in the office, grab people, go for a coffee, have lunch with them, keep building those social connections and checking in on people and getting to know them properly so that you can identify and understand when there is a change of behavior. I know like my team is really good. We keep a general tab on who's had lunch. And if everyone has gone for lunch and you come back and that person is still sitting at their desk and they don't look like they've moved, you kind of just gently prompt them like, have you had a chance to have a break? Have you gone and eaten something, had some water, stretched your legs? That kind of just constant, gentle checking in, seeing how people are going, reminding them that like if they need help, you're around. I think that's probably the most useful point. If you notice that it's getting more serious and you're thinking this isn't just, normal fatigue or normal exhaustion, I think it's going a bit beyond that. Sometimes it might feel a bit uncomfortable to kind of confront that person and say, I've noticed something's a bit off. But some organizations, I know we do at Allianz, we have mental health first aiders, and you can reach out to that person and say, hey, I'm really worried about this person. They're just acting a bit off. And these mental health first aiders are then trained to go and have that conversation with them. I think when it's a close friend, it's a little bit easier to say, hey, I'm really worried about you, and to have those more open dialogues around mental health. But I think in today's day and age, and particularly amongst early in career employees, we have such a stronger level of mental health literacy and an understanding of what resources are available. So most early in career employees should hopefully know that you have an employee assistance program, which is a confidential place usually a phone number. Some places do texts. I know some places have online sites that you can use. It just depends on your employer's provider, where you can go and get help. And it's not necessarily just mental health help. They have a whole range of services. So if you've never checked out your employee assistance program, I encourage you after this call, go and have a look and see what's on there, see what's available to you. We also know sites like Beyond Blue have great resources, and the Black Dog Institute also. There's heaps of stuff out there. It's just being able to find it. And if you're at that point where self-servicing isn't cutting it and you're thinking, I actually think I want to talk to someone, there's subsidized sessions that you can access through a GP approved mental health plan. So it's just about being proactive in accessing the resources that are available to you and having that self-reflection to know, okay, this is something that I can manage by myself and with my support network, versus, all right, I'm at the stage now where I need some more help, and I'm going to go talk to someone who's specialized in providing that help.
Thanks for that, Beck and John. For me personally, I found that having a strong supportive network, whether it's family, friends, trusted colleagues, or managers, does play a huge role in preventing my burnout, which is something we also saw in the CMHAA survey too. For early in career professionals, supportive relationships are crucial and reinforces what you mentioned earlier, John, about that strong connection between loneliness and burnout. So Beck listed out some strategies. John, are there any other strategies that you would suggest to our audience today that may have not already been mentioned as well?
This might not be new, but it's an easy way to kind of think about just a personal kind of strategy, a framework to kind of think about, and it's just the ABCs, right? A is for awareness, like understanding where your source of stress is coming from, and whether it is coming from the work that you're doing, whether it's sort of those interpersonal relationships, or maybe some of your own individual kind of mindsets that's creating a lot of these kind of stresses. And one recommendation that I know works quite well is just for a week, keep a stress journal. So kind of just kind of journal for a week, during the day, what caused you, what was kind of stressful, what were you doing? And after a week, you'll kind of start seeing the pattern of, every time I do this type of thing, maybe interacting with a colleague, this was causing me some stress, or maybe when I'm working on this type of work, that was causing stress. You'll easily see sort of that pattern of what's going on to give yourself a little bit of awareness on, okay, I need to maybe see what I can do to fix that issue. B in the ABCs for kind of setting boundaries. Tons of information out there about setting boundaries, but just one thing to remember, boundaries are all about who we give power to. So when you don't set your own boundaries, somebody else is going to set them for you, and you're not going to like it. Awareness, boundaries. C is for connections. We had just kind of talked about the importance of being connected with others. They can be peers, they can be kind of mentoring relationship, especially for the kind of early career. For those of you who are in early career, that mentoring is so it's really kind of important. And I would recommend, and I know a lot of senior leaders actually really value this, and I value this, which is kind of offering that reverse mentoring. There's a lot of things that senior leaders would love to kind of pick your brains about, and it becomes a really mutually beneficial connection there. I think it's really important. And one of the best things about connection that I always harp on, actually, especially with senior leaders, is you gotta have a skill, or learn a new skill or a new hobby. That really helps in terms of kind of setting your mind to something else that's not work related. All the things that we just talked about, there's so much stuff going on that it's hard not to think about work. But I know for me, I cook a lot. When I'm cooking, it's hard to think about anything else because you don't want to burn your food. So like some type of hobby that would be really good. And the S, so it's sort of ABCs. The S is just a little bit of self-compassion. There's a lot going on out there, and especially in early career, I think most people have this really high expectations of where they want to be within their career. They see others who might be going faster than they are, and there's all of these kind of expectations. Let some of that go. the expectations, some of the judgments go, there's not just one right path to where you're going. So, give yourself a break. There's so much else going on other than work that, we're all kind of under the stress about. I think the World Economic Forum has a word for it called polycrisis. There's so much, social, economic, political, environmental, like there's a lot going on. So it's okay to kind of let some of that go at the moment. And probably the last thing about self-compassion, which is, I would say, is to care for yourself the way you would care for others. I think a lot of people are probably a lot better at caring for other people than they are for themselves. If you just kind of think, what would I do if, this was a friend of mine? Just do that for yourself. And I think that will kind of go a really long way.
Thanks for that, John. And hopefully it hasn't reached that point for anyone on the call today. But for those who are already past that point of burnout prevention, identification, and are actively going through it, what would you suggest as the best first steps to take, or any external resources that they could refer to?
So first of all, if you're kind of experiencing burnout, the first thing I want to say to you is that it is perfectly normal. Most of us will dip our toes into a burnout, and most of us will experience burnout at some point within our career, and that is a perfectly normal kind of experience. So, don't feel like this is something that it's something that you have done or you haven't done that's caused this to happen. And in terms of what to do about that, I think the first thing that I would say is, if you do feel like this is something that's beyond just being stressed, that this is getting to that burnout stage where you actually need help to get yourself out of that, just name it without shame. Burnout isn't something that's happened because you have done something or haven't done something. It's not you not doing some crazy hack to prevent yourself from burning. Burnout is a system failure within sort of the organizations that you're in. So know that, and so be able to kind of name that, and then reflect on what's really draining you. Like, where is that source of problem? Again, that model, I think it's a really useful to kind of evaluate where is it coming from, and what are you missing from the role, and who might be able to help with that. And once you're sort of having that sort of awareness, you can really kind of start understanding where you need to go for that. So it's kind of providing yourself with a bit of a roadmap. One question that I always ask to the people I work with, if you could create that perfect work environment or that perfect job, what does that look like? And what's missing between that ideal that you have in your job today? And once you sort of figure that out, you can kind of start saying, oh, maybe I should start doing this and now get me a few of these things. And finally, as Kaz mentioned, talk to somebody you trust. If you are starting, don't feel like you need to kind of go at this alone. I know there's sort of the stigma of saying, oh, I'm feeling a little bit burned out, because I think traditionally there is still that stigma of when someone say that they're burned out, it's sort of admitting, oh, I can't do the job, or I can't hack it, and that is completely untrue. And so talk to somebody you trust. It could be a manager, it could be your peers. There's the sort of EAP programs that was mentioned as well.
Thank you so much to both John and Beck for such a thoughtful and honest discussion on your experiences. Now, we'd love to hear for some questions from those of you who are attending this session. So feel free to type it in the chat and we'll start picking a few to answer. So while we wait for the questions, I also wanted to share that CMHAA is planning to shortly undertake some in-depth focus group research on early in careers workplace wellbeing, including their experience around burnout. CMHAA want to cut through the theory and provide practical insights that can assist us as EICs, as well as our employers, education institutions, and even government to help early in careers thrive at work. I'd really encourage everyone on this call to keep a watch for further information to this on our website and LinkedIn, and be sure to sign up so that your voice can be heard. Now, let's open up the chat for questions. So we've received one that would love to hear what's one small habit you've personally done to proactively prevent burnout. Beck, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah. Gonna out myself here. I'm a real productivity nerd, like big time. I have a whole system. And the reason I have this system is because part of, I think, what helps me manage feelings of stress is a feeling of control. And so within what I control what I can. So I spend about 30 minutes on a Friday afternoon planning for my following week. I check what meetings I have. I start scheduling deep work for any prep that I need to do ahead of those. And I use the task function in Outlook to create tasks. So if I'm in a meeting and someone tells me that there's something I need to action, rather than trying to remember it or writing it down somewhere separately, it goes as a task in Outlook. And that way, if I've got a weird 20 minutes between meetings and I think that job is going to take 20 minutes, I know I can fit it in then. And I'm not stressed about like remembering to do it, when I'm going to find the time. It just gives me that sense of control. And it ties in with my email system as well. So rather than having 500 emails and looking at that and just feeling overwhelmed and like I'm never going to be able to clear it, I try to keep my inbox to less than 10. And then so part of my 30 minutes is going through that and looking at what's an FYI that I just need to file away, what is something that I can action immediately and then delete or file appropriately, and then flagging things that might need a little bit more time and attention, and I then schedule that in. So it becomes a meeting in my calendar with dedicated time already. And that just protects my peace a little bit and my sanity, because it means I know what's happening when. And then I also have a view of if something unexpected comes up and it's urgent and needs to be dealt with now, I know what can be shuffled around to accommodate that without feeling like I've been thrown completely off balance.
Thanks, Beck. Another one which, John, maybe you could answer. How do we move away from thinking and managing burnout as a mental health issue?
Oh, that's a great question. That's one of the hopes of the research that I do working with organizations too, that we stop treating things like burnout and workplace mental health like it's some type of perk or entitlement for workers, right? Mental health, having good mental health at work isn't just about supporting people when they're struggling. It's really about designing the work so people don't need to recover from it in the first place. So really switching that mentality around and kind of building the type of environments where people can think clearly, they can contribute fully, and then go home with energy still left for their lives. Now, in terms of how do we do that, I think that's the trickier part. I think leadership has. I think getting leaders to sort of rethink what that means. It's probably the key to this. We still have a lot of leaders who kind of balance out. Well, we can be productive, or we can have good mental health. We've got to, and this is so society wide, like we've got to have that conversation of it is not either or, it is and, right? Healthy people are more productive. And if we want to improve productivity, for example, in Australia, that is the number one question everywhere. This needs to be part of the conversation. We have seen, burnout rates increase quite a lot within Australia, and we've seen productivity stall. Now, there's a lot of reasons why productivity stall, but this needs to be part of that conversation as well.
Thanks for that, John. Now, another question from Libby. She's asked, when you have been working in a state of burnout for some time, how do you make the move to ask for support and help when everything is overwhelming? It's wonderful to hear that this is something you can come back from. So I'll leave it to the table for anyone to answer that one.
I might jump in here. I think the first kind of point of call is it's really hard to have that conversation off the cuff. And there's no rule against planning that conversation first. So if it's going to help you feel more comfortable broaching that subject with your manager, who's probably the person who can offer you the most support, there's nothing wrong with putting your thoughts down on a page first, reading it through, reflecting it, checking that it's accurately describing what you're feeling. If you've already kind of identified this could be different and it would make things much better for me, have that in there so that you can enter it into the discussion. And if you're so concerned about, how this might be perceived or what your manager might say to you, and you're just feeling really anxious, there's also nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to bring a support person along. Your manager's job is to make sure you can do your job. And so they're going to want you to be well, and they're going to want you to feel supported. And if that means having someone come along for you to have this conversation with them, they're not going to say no. But I think as much as you can, prep yourself, because it can be quite an emotional conversation, and sometimes it's easier to come into it from a place of calm and a place of I know what I'm going to say and what I want to get out of this conversation, and I've got someone with me that I can feel a bit more comfortable having this conversation.
Thanks, Beck. John, did you want to add on to that one?
No, just a really quick thing. So I agree with everything kind of Beck just said, but just because somebody's able to keep it together and look like they are holding things together doesn't mean it's been easy, and it doesn't mean that situations don't change either. You might be able to do the same piece of work, but life changes. Things happen, and so I don't think you should sort of be worried about going to someone asking for help after you've been able to do something for a while, because life changes, situations change. So now things are different. Then let's talk about how what kind of support you might need now.
Thanks everyone for that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we had for questions today. Let me just share my screen onto the last slide. But a huge thank you again to John and Beck for sharing your insights, experience, and practical advice. And to everyone else for engaging so openly today as well. So if you'd like to learn more about John's work and at Infinite Potential and what his team is doing, please feel free to visit his website at infinitepotential.com.au, where you can find their latest insights and resources. We'd also love to hear what you thought of today's session. There's a QR code up for our feedback form, which will only take a minute or two and really helps us shape future events and make them relevant to you. And finally, if anyone is interested in getting more involved with the Corporate Mental Health Alliance and the Thriving from the Start Network, you can head over to our website at cmhaa.org.au to get in touch with us. Thank you again, Beck and John, and thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.